Over the weekend in UFC 262, we saw an extremely talented lineup between a number of different fighters. And one fight that really did not disappoint the fans was, of course, between Ronaldo Jacare Souza and Andre Muniz. Now, the result of this fight I expect to be talked about for a very long time because not only did it end with Muniz submitting Souza, but during the submission we heard what sounded like an audible snap of Souza's arm bone. Now, right after the fight, of course, once again, we heard that audible pop, which sounded like it was coming from Souza's arm when he was caught in that arm bar. And there were questions whether or not it was a broken arm or perhaps something was going on at Souza's elbow. Unfortunately, we found out that Souza does in fact have a broken humerus, and he recently did have surgery for that. As of right now, we're going to wait and see how Souza does with his follow-up appointments and to see how he does moving forward with everything such as therapy and his rehab process. But since some people may not be too familiar with what's happening anatomically when a person puts somebody in an arm bar, I'm going to go ahead and focus on that in today's video. Welcome UFC fans. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Nick Gallo and I'm a doctor of physical therapy. With this video, I'm going to focus on, of course, that vicious arm bar that Andre Muniz caught Ronaldo Jacare Souza in at UFC 262. With this video, first I'm going to show the arm bar so that we get a good visualization for Souza's mechanism of injury. Then I'll go over specifically what's happening anatomically when somebody gets somebody in an arm bar. And finally, I'll go over a fractured humerus, some potential surgical options, and what to expect moving forward after a surgery. If you like today's video and you find it informative, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel because I will be making more videos in the future regarding sports injuries, rehabilitation, and other physical therapy related content. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please leave those in the comment section below. Now, what's interesting about this fight, of course, is the fact that when Muniz has Souza in that arm bar, he progresses the submission, and then we actually hear what sounds like an audible snap of his arm. And I'll go ahead and play that briefly. But as you can see right here, this is essentially where he has him in the arm bar, and then right here, that's when we hear what sounds like an audible snap, and you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a jerk as Muniz is finishing that submission. Now, when a person is putting somebody in an arm bar, essentially what they're doing is they're going to squeeze the person's humerus or the upper arm bone with their thighs, and they're going to grab, of course, the person's hand, and they're going to extend backwards. And so when a person is doing this, this is of course putting a lot of strain at the person's elbow, and it's also putting a lot of strain at the person's humerus. So right after this happened to Souza, people were wondering, well, is it the broken arm or is it something going on at the elbow? Because both areas are at extreme risk. Now, we do know that Souza was dealing with a broken humerus bone. The humerus bone, of course, is the bone in the upper arm extending from the shoulder going down to the elbow. This is a very thick, long bone that we have in the arm, and once again, when a person is putting somebody in an arm bar, depending on where they have themselves placed on the person's arm, they can put immense pressure going through that humerus bone. So if a person is going through that submission and the person actually is not tapping or is trying to fight through it, eventually what can happen is you can get a snapping or a fracturing of that humerus bone. Now, of course, when a person is dealing with a fracture, essentially there are two types of scenarios that can occur. That is, the bone is either non-displaced or displaced. When a person is dealing with a non-displaced fracture, essentially what you're seeing on the x-ray or the imaging that has been performed is that you're seeing that there is a crack going through the bone, but both bones seem to be in good alignment. The other scenario, of course, when a person is dealing with a displaced fracture, this is when a person obviously has that line going through the bone, showing that there is a fracture, and then the bones actually are out of alignment. Now, for a displaced fracture like that, and if it is bad enough, a lot of times what will happen is surgery, of course, will be indicated. Now, the specific type of surgery was not revealed to us, but in cases where a person has had a very displaced humerus fracture like this, and I've seen this in personal practice, there's a type of surgery that can be performed, and this is known as an open reduction internal fixation, or an ORIF for short. Now, when a person is having this ORIF surgery, essentially what the doctor is going to do is they're going to surgically put the bones back together, and then going to use plates and screws to essentially hold everything in place. For open reduction, this means that the bones are put back together surgically. There are cases where you can do a closed reduction where the bones essentially are put back together non-surgically. The internal fixation part of the surgery is when the bones are physically reconnected back together. So open reduction, the doctor is going to be surgically putting the bones back together. And internal fixation, this is the process when the doctor is going to be inserting the screws or plates or whatever they're using to essentially hold the two displaced bones together. Now, right after surgery, a person is of course going to be in a sling, and they can be seen in therapy right out of surgery. Now, in the beginning, this is something known as the early motion phase, and this is when a person is going to be doing very light exercises to that shoulder. They're going to be doing things such as passive range of motion, but there's going to be a limit for how much the person can actually move the joint, and this will depend on the surgeon's protocol. But essentially in passive range of motion, what's going on there is a therapist is going to be moving the arm gently, or the person is going to be using something such as a pulley system to essentially move that arm without the arm activating any muscles. Then as the person is progressing and they're out of the range of motion precautions, then we can work in something known as active assistive range of motion. Now, when a person is doing active assistive range of motion, this is when the therapist is moving the arm and we're saying, okay, I want you to move the arm with me. So the person is getting a little bit of activation, however, they're not getting full activation. Usually full activation of muscles or active range of motion, as we call it in the clinic, that's usually reserved for week 6 and above to ensure that everything has healed. Of course, during this time, the person is going to be having follow-up appointments to ensure that the bone is healing properly and that everything looks good with the implant, whatever they decided to use to surgically repair the humerus bone together. But as a person, of course, is progressing in therapy, the activities are getting a little more advanced. But usually, I'd say generally speaking, a person still is not supposed to be doing a lot of heavy lifting, such as overhead lifting, until about the 4 to 6 month mark, depending on how the person is doing in therapy and with their follow-up appointments. So as of right now, once again, I don't know specifically whether or not Souza had the ORIF surgery. This is the most common surgery that I've seen for a displaced humerus fracture. If he did have that, then of course he's going to have some precautions for a while. And it's going to be really important that we essentially just follow his case, see how he does with his follow-up appointments and with his rehab. And as soon as I hear something regarding an update on his case, I'll be sure to update everybody in the comment section. And also, if you happen to hear something, please feel free to update everybody as well. And that's it as of right now regarding Ronaldo Jacare Souza's humerus fracture that he suffered in UFC 262. Once again, if you really like today's video and you like the content and you find it informative, please subscribe to the channel because I will be making more videos in the future. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.